What is up, man? I feel like, I don't know, man. I missed you. It feels like it's been a while.
It has been a while.
Should we remind
2
everyone
weeks.
of our kind of new setup so that,
Yeah.
because I mean, most of the time, if you've been a long time or even short time listener of the Kansas City Underground podcast,
This is technically the third time we'll have done this, though.
yeah. So if you are a long time listener, you've mostly listened via however you get your podcasts, right?
That's right.
If that's iTunes, if that's Spotify, if there's others, cool. But we are also now blasting this out on YouTube. So I imagine we might have some people on YouTube watching us. And I just want to say congratulations because we're beautiful.
Congratulations.
Congratulations for stumbling upon two very beautiful men talking about Jesus and how to reach people.
Can I start this over now?
Why would you want to start this over?
Well, you got to redo. I feel uncomfortable.
Why? Is it because you don't feel beautiful? Because I think you look beautiful.
Let's jump into this episode, Corey.
Okay, so Brian, where we been at, dude? It's cold. There's snow outside, right? We've had some snow days. It's just an interesting, time right now here in Kansas City. But Brian, I want to hear how you feeling, man. Are you ready? Like, how you feeling about this this series that we've been in for the last however many weeks?
Well, I think we've had a lot of good feedback about the focus on urban disciple-making movements. It's been a lot of fun doing these interviews. I think we're somewhere around halfway through now. So according to your original count, this is episode 300.
Yes, something like
14
that.
or something.
Neither of us are great at math.
It's, I don't know. I thought you were going to ask me how like my last 2 weeks have been.
How have your last 2 weeks been?
Yeah, let's just jump into this.
That's good. I think I asked you how you thought about this podcast series. I think it's been good, man. I think it's been a way for us to talk about a lot of things we already talk about a lot, with some specific, just like new things. So we're really grateful for 248 and the way that they've just kind of organized so many of these things that I think in many ways we've been encouraged because it's like we're running after these things. Like our story is super consistent with I think a lot of the observations of what it looks like when the gospel moves in urban settings. And so we're learning, but we also get to talk about from experience as well. We're moving on to, what's this, number 7?
Number 7.
Number 7. What is number 7, Brian?
Prioritize inside leaders.
Wait.
Prioritize.
There it is. Man, you hear the difference. Wait, say it the first way. Say it the first way.
The word that bothers you is when I say priority.
Well, I don't even know what you just said. Like I know what you said, but I don't know what you just said.
Priority.
Look at that. Look, there's so many syllables that you just kind of just breeze right through before, and now
Prioritize.
So we're prioritizing inside leaders. Brian, do you feel like this is a topic we've talked about before?
It is. I think when we were setting up and preparing for this conversation, I was like, I feel like we've already done this one. And I think the reason that I felt that way was because I think implicitly you and I were both hinting at assuming this one in the previous ideas of develop servant-hearted leaders or invest in one-on-one disciple making. Like in our mind, the picture is like, oh yeah, develop an inside leader that is doing one-on-one disciple making that replicates. Like those are the previous 3. So, and I think Michael said this. I think I was assuming there was a logical flow to this. Like they started with the top one and there was some flow. And then he was like, well, we didn't set it up that way. So I would say if you're thinking about it, start with this paradigm first.
Yeah, yeah. Like the language that we are very specific about in Kansas City, third stop on the missionary pathway is what?
Plant the gospel.
Plant the gospel.
Sorry,
it's like, yeah, you had to find the picture in your brain. And that's very intentional language, and it goes along with this topic, right? When we say prioritize inside leadership, so much of it is like the idea of outsiders versus insiders, the idea of extracting versus planting. All of it is almost like this foreign outside voice, and then what's actually happening on the ground. And like, it's so crazy to me that is the norm, that we're like we always feel like the outsider, like that's how did we get to that spot, Brian, where it's like the outsider is like the norm in church and leadership and disciple making world? Because in some ways, and maybe we're so deep into this that this is such a no duh reality. Like, of course, people who are insiders are going to be able to reach their own people. But man, like, how did we even get to the point that we even have to talk about this?
Well, my mind went in 1,000 different directions, and I think I'm going to be critical for a moment, or sound that way.
You can do that. We give you permission.
But I want to be kind while I do it. So I'm thinking maybe this isn't center target of what you're going for. But one of the things that came to the forefront was like, well, because we had a reach people mentality that person up there on the stage is the one that does the reaching. And we did whole campaigns about bring your friends to church and be in this space where they'll hear the gospel. And so people are extracting out of relational networks, bringing to a place where there's sort of a get saved and go to heaven kind of mentality of sharing the gospel, of salvation, of a place where discipleship happens, all of those sorts of things. So I guess I'm saying that might not be center target when you say an outside leader, but I'm trying to think of like the clergy is sort of the outside leader, and we were told bring your friends here, and they'll hear the gospel.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying is like those two worlds overlap here as we're talking about this concept. Like, because when we start from the idea that we need to see the whole city reached, we want all these different pockets of people to come to Jesus, like just trying to put on bigger church services or services.
And you made fun of me.
Yeah, I did. I know. I'm trying to speak like an insider, right? I want you to understand what I'm saying. When no one else will be able to understand what I'm saying. Say, welcome to my world. No, I think that's the irony of this whole conversation is like our strategy has been so illogical in many ways to think about reaching all these different groups of people, and we're just going to kind of do it one way. And we're going to, put on the skin that's the same for everyone, put on the leadership side. I mean, just kind of McDonald's franchise, this kind of idea over and over and over again. And when you talk about inside leaders and prioritizing inside leaders, perhaps the most logical and, number one reason we talk about this is because they're able to reach their people. Like, that's when it really all comes down to it. Like, the best leaders are going to be not necessarily trained outside people, even if they seem to be the most gifted or they can, speak the best or whatever. It's going to be someone who can relate, right, to other people. We want to see people reach the, I don't know, whatever. There's 1,000 contexts anyway. Like, I'm going to jail just because I've spent a lot of time in jail, and it's such a specific example. What? I've spent some time in jail. Yeah. What's so funny?
Because
it's normal. A lot of people have spent a lot of time in jail. All right, so I've spent a lot of time in jail, and
as an outsider,
yeah. I mean, let me finish. And so, as an outsider, it's such a clear picture for me. I always go to that example just because it's so much of my story. That like there's so many things. I saw a picture on Facebook the other day of a buddy of mine from that world, and it was like literally like it was a handgun. Right, and it was a very specific handgun. He said, if you didn't have one of these when you were 13 or 14 years old, we had very different childhoods.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so I read that we had very different childhoods, right? And so I'm ministering alongside this guy, but this guy is a significantly better leader in that context because he can say that, and the other people reading that post are like, yeah, totally, that's me. And I'm like this, like,
I didn't have that handgun.
There's not even a spot in my brain to say that's normal for me, right? So just like that on the very simple level is like people can reach people that they're like.
Yeah. The 248 crew does a good job of summing up all of the color commentary you just gave by saying like the importance of identifying and working primarily with leaders that belong, quote unquote, belong, are part of the tribe or affinity. Many of the leaders that we interviewed recognize their own affinities, propensity for cultural biases, blind spots, and or their inability to completely contextualize the gospel into another peripheral place of belonging.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's, why am I blanking on his name? Other jail guy. Phil Alessi, right? He's the one that says
a lot of
jail guys.
You just mentioned like hundreds of my friends. Yeah, Phil
is the reason to belong, right? Isn't that him that Please tell me I got that.
It's a very good chance that was a Phil Leslie. Do you have a
I
reason
thought
to
you
belong?
always
I thought that was a
credited
Roy
to-
Moran. I thought I always credit that to Roy.
I don't know, man.
It sounds like I think we should just start crediting ourselves.
You can.
Yeah, so that's something I say a lot.
That's true.
That's something that-
You do say
I
that
do say it a lot.
lot.
That's something that I 100% came up with all by myself.
We empower and equip people who have a reason to belong in this network.
Yeah.
And so the role of us as the external leader of the story you're telling as an incarnational kingdom translator becomes even more significant as they help newer internal believers to hear and obey God for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's the role you're playing in the jail context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. and So let's actually, let's get that zoom out a little bit perspective, thinking about why cities. What's different about a city than maybe any other rural global context? Like, is this more important in a city setting? Is it just the exact same? Is this like every movement wherever? Like, yeah, I'm an outsider and I'm trying to reach this, this specific tribe in Kenya. Like, of course I need to find the insiders who are going to allow access and say, yeah, come on in, and then raise up new leaders in that area. Like, I've been to those places. That makes sense. Why cities? Why do you think it's more significant in cities, or this conversation is so important for cities?
I'm just going to answer with what the document says.
That's perfect. I mean, they did the work for us. So this is compelling. We're just going to read the report.
I'm not going to read it. I'm going to summarize these three things. And I think these are things, when you asked earlier about, this is something we've talked about before. Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to try to come up with new ways to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
But it's just like important to keep reminding ourselves of this. Cities are complex systems that they said, I've never said millions, but I'm going to adopt this now. Cities are made up not of one culture, but millions of cultures
absolutely.
and subcultures. And that's probably true when you get into those bigger numbers to go like, my joke is always soccer moms are a people group. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but then I follow that up with like they drive the same car. They shop at the same Costco for the same snacks and stand on the same sidelines, and they have the same
yoga pants.
hopes.
They're always like, I feel like as a soccer mom, if I were to become a soccer mom, I would need to wear those yoga pants. Which when I pick up my kids from preschool through the years, I was like the only parent picking up that wasn't wearing yoga pants, and I always thought it'd be so funny if one day I just showed up, wore the same thing that all the soccer moms. Anyway, that's an outsider trying to be an insider, and it just doesn't work, right? Like you see that gap. This is why it's so important for the insider to reach the insider.
I don't want to see any kind of. Okay, they have the same hopes and dreams though, that their kid's going to grow up and be professional or whatever. And then I always say they have the same heartbreak too. Their kid doesn't grow up to be professional. So it's like, rather than you trying to be the soccer mom, it's like if that inside leader is like, that's a subculture though. Like that, they share language. They understand what it's like to relate to the coach, to know about navigating home life schedules. To there's so much that they share, and there's untold, apparently millions of those in a city.
Yeah.
So cities are filled with all this kind of diversity. We always use that metaphor of Papua New Guinea. It's a little island nation with 800 languages or dialects spoken. It's like if you tried to reach everybody, it's not one culture. As soon as you deviate language, there's immediately 800 different cultures. And so the way to engage that is to send people to learn all those dialects or languages and speak the gospel into it. So our city is that same way. It's filled with all these like people that speak just a little bit differently.
Yeah.
We might, many of us, be speaking English, but like the way that we say these words, or the way that like my kids, use Riz or whatever the word for the year is. Cash told me the other day, he's like, you know what the word for the year is? Riz. Okay. Oh, am I supposed to incorporate that?
Yeah, like I've been hanging out with a lot of young adult 20-somethings, and my friend Sam, who's part of that team, she and I were texting about something, and she sent back a picture of like when our group was meeting. It was kind of a funny picture, and I wrote "ha," H-A, right? So when I write "ha," Brian, like I'm like "ha," it's like a "ha," that's funny, right? But what came across? She responded. She says, "Ha, why not two ha's? It sounds like you're angry." And I'm like, who makes these rules? I was like, my generation made texting. All right. So first of all, second of all, so then I'm hanging out with, there's like 5 of us. All all of them they're all like 23, and then there's me, who's
23
in my 30s. 23 and me, and we found out we're all related. Yeah, so we're sitting there with 23 and me, and same thing. So I threw this out to the group. I was like, "Hey, this is the story," and I said "ha," and and I was like, "When you hear me say "ha," what do you think?" And they all said, "Oh yeah, that sounds you need at least 2 ha's and an exclamation point or something." It's like they knew the language, like.
Yeah.
And first of all, there are a few things in the world that make you feel more old than having a conversation with 23-year-olds about texting etiquette. But still, it's just like that's another example, right? Of like the little translating, like the least amount of translating. That's really the pockets, the subculture pockets that we're talking about. And so to answer the question that I threw out to you before was like, I think it's even more important in cities because one, that in some ways the insiders are hard. In some ways it's harder to find. It's not quite as obvious. But the fact that there are so many millions of contexts that it's even more important that we go all in on this is that we help mobilize people who have a reason to belong. We help find others and raise up those who have a reason to belong. Otherwise, it's just like things will stifle. Mm-hmm. Like we won't see multiplication. We won't see things jump. We'll say super homogenous in a very specific area, just kind of like a normal church. Like a normal church that's planted in an area, generally going to reach people that are all kind of the exact same.
Yeah. Yeah, and language is just one thing. So when we start talking about these subcultures, this is why it's important to identify indigenous leaders, inside leaders, whatever word you want to choose there, because they know more than just the language. It's about, I always say the stories, the songs, the festivals of the people, whatever, because it's like, it's nuanced beyond just the words I say, but I know when people gather in my neighborhood around what specific things. Mm-hmm. And I know this is something you were going to get into later of like, I'm becoming the inside leader in my neighborhood. Yeah. I don't have to identify it. I am that. But as we identify specific leaders in other contexts, even as we make disciples in our context and we start listening to the people and they start talking about another relational network they're in, it's like, that's a moment to go, I don't know what you just said about whatever their hobby is or whatever their passion is. Like, you said words that are unfamiliar to me. It's like, a language I don't know.
It's like when you talk about triathlons and Ironman competitions, I have to Google whatever word you just, like you send me an example of how to swim, and I had to like Google the word first before I even looked at the video to understand what you're talking about. So, 100%.
Yeah, so there's so much more that like it's important to identify these leaders because they know how to contextualize. And the 2 and 3 on here that 248 proposes, indigenous leaders have pre-existing relationships with members of the community. You don't have to take the time to build that up. You don't have to spend the hours, the days, the weeks to go like, I'm going to be friends with all these people, learn their language, learn their stories, learn their... You have a space where that's already true. You've done the work.
Yeah. I mean, actually, this is going to feel very non-missionary sounding of mine. It actually makes contextualizing like way less important by the traditional understanding of contextualizing. Yeah. So I'm going to go to this different language and people group, and I have to learn the language so that I can contextualize. I have to learn their habits. I have to learn their hobbies. I have to learn their way of, so that I can meet them part way, so that I can communicate the gospel in a way that is effective and meaningful and makes sense.
And some people are called to go do that in spaces.
And that's great.
Even in our own city.
100%. However, for the most time, it's way easier than that.
Pay attention to what you're already doing.
Well, yeah, you personally, but even as an outsider.
Yeah. As an outsider,
finding someone and the someones who, and you're gonna have to do a level of contextualizing to find that someone, but not the same level as you're not out there trying to put a program on or something like the perfect way to reach these people. Find those people. Like Rick and Alice Bush tell that story a lot.
I was just thinking about them, actually.
Yeah, because their story is great because they are outsiders reaching homeless community, and we've interviewed them, Rick, just recently.
Now, they had to fully do the contextualizing work, though. Like, they reoriented their lives around that space.
Yeah, kind of, but even in that, they had...
They're still identifying inside leaders.
Yeah, and they had a woman who lived with them for
Right.
multiple months
Yeah.
who had been homeless for a long time, and she's the one who completely taught them to not do all the contextualizing. It's
Yeah,
basically just go and don't bring Johnson County to
Yeah.
the streets, is what she told them. Like, so I think there's a level of contextualizing all the time, and understanding when you're needing to relate to people in ways that they can hear it. That's always going on all the time. But when we get the shift and just say, no, actually, we're going to focus on finding people who don't have to contextualize because that's who they are. It's just simpler. It's easier. It's more effective. I think what would be helpful for us in the last, 10 minutes or so is we're talking about like how to do that. Like, and how do we actually help people reach their own pockets? How do we see as many pockets engaged with as many inside leaders as possible? How do we just effectively do that? And I think that's where we can talk about it on a city level. It is a combination of two things in my mind, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Combination of after I tell you all the answers, I would love for you to affirm the answers in which I give. I think that missionaries all over the world find and help raise up inside leaders to reach their own people. That's great. They're an outsider finding insiders. And I think we still need to do that work in the city a lot. For instance, this is a story, and then I'm going to go back. I hung out with a guy this week who was a missionary overseas and has been a disciple-making movement guy, and has been in Kansas City for a couple years. We just met this week. He was telling me a story of he met a guy from Yemen here on Missouri side, and had some spiritual conversations. And this guy really leaning in. He started the Discovery Bible Study, and every single time they meet, this guy from Yemen is inviting other people that he knows, like Orthodox Jew, and then just like all these different people that they're telling me. Just it didn't make sense that they're all in the room, but they were all people he was super connected to, and he was obviously had a lot of influence. So my friend who I was meeting telling me that story, like he is raising up an inside leader who can reach their own people. Like that's what he's doing, and he's an outsider, and we need to do that all over the city.
Yeah.
We also have thousands of church pew sitters and attenders who are so many of them. It's like we've got this giant army of disciple makers that could be mobilized and could be effective. And many of them have spaces that they already belong within, right? So much of our work in KC Underground has been to mobilize those people. Mobilize in such a way that really they function like the person of peace that we see in Scripture, because they're the insider, and we're say, hey, where do you live, learn, work, play, right now, and who are your people? Who are the people that you have a reason to belong? Go there, be with them, go all in, intend to see disciple making, intend to see a spiritual family emerge, right? Like, don't do the side work of it. Don't do all this other church stuff, and then maybe someday you'll get to it. Like, go all in, intend to see it. And so what we're actually going to see, if we just do that and that alone, we're going to begin to see insiders engaging thousands and thousands and thousands of pockets in a city. Even if we just do that, if we just mobilize already believers, right? So I think in the West, in a complex urban environment like the West, one of the best things we can do is mobilize believers. Now, that all these other questions that come with how to actually do that and or whatever, but I do think we have seen more fruit in actually mobilizing believers. We just have to finding the right believers, right? Finding the right ones that are ready. And I think that really is a huge piece of prioritizing inside leaders.
That's really good, Corey.
Thanks. I'd love to hear you affirm. Go on, just affirm it over and over again.
Wow, man, it's just so good to be in a room with you.
What did you think about the wisdom? Did you think it was like?
I was actually thinking before you started talking.
Wait, what are you trying to say? Is that you didn't listen to a thing I just said?
I did. I just made some notes about what I was going to say afterwards. The question I was asking is, this feels directed toward network leaders that might be like us that get paid to do this. Like, oh, that's cool. You guys should prioritize inside leaders like me if I'm just an ordinary person listening to this podcast. And there's just a reality of that's part of our role, with the underground is we're thinking about that all the time.
Yeah.
We meet people and they're like, hey, I'd love to do this. It's like, yeah, you should do that. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We want to help you do that. And that's fun. But I was trying to think through like normal people that are already a part of the underground, the 300 plus missionary leaders in the city who are thinking to themselves, I'd prioritize inside leaders. Now, we hinted at this a little bit when you're the person of peace in a network of relationships or a neighborhood. Like, as you make disciples and raise them up, they may be sent out into new contexts. But this is just like another piece that, as you were saying, mobilize believers. The best people to do that are not church pastors.
Yeah.
Or us.
Yeah.
It's like ordinary people who are beginning to own this, adopt this, and they've got friends that, you know, they're like, yeah, we love Jesus and we love mission. It's like, invite them for a season to join you in disciple making maybe, but just have more conversations around this. Mm-hmm. Like, who are your friends that are not owning disciple making, but you can tell they've got a strong sense of belonging or relational capital among a certain group of people, and then have that I see in you conversation.
Yep.
Like, totally. Man, what beautiful relationships you have. I love how you talk about so-and-so and so-and-so and how they come to you for this and that. Like, you're right at the beginning of being able to invite them into spiritual conversations that would accelerate into a microchurch one day. Have you ever thought about that? What about that scares you? I can't solve any of that for you, but just to begin to cultivate that spiritual interest in these, what you're talking about, already believers, to mobilize that army. It's like the best people to do it are just normal people that have friends that aren't engaged in it yet.
Yeah. And I think you touched on, like, how do you do it? You just, like, you help. Yeah. Like, you help them, like, see that that's a real thing. Yeah. Like, so I was sitting with my friend Tristan, and he, I'm sure he'd be cool if I told this story. Right? So he and I are very different. Like, in some ways, he's, you know,
you're very different, but you're sure he'd be okay.
He is, yeah. He's 30 years old ish, maybe 29. He's from the Caribbean. Dude is, and he's a really talented dancer, right? And I know that I can shake a booty a little bit, right? But I'm
explicit.
This guy knows what I'm talking about, right? So he just, the dance parties that we have here in the office. No, but like he's just like, he's good at it. Like, and so he's kind of felt this, like, kind of, you can't what? You can't get the mental picture of,
keep going.
Okay, so gonna push through. Okay, so Tristan is really good at dancing. And so I taught him a few moves the other day, and he's like, man, this will change everything, right? This will change everything. So he started kind of this group. I mean, it's not a church ministry or anything like that. There's believers that are part of it. There's a ton that aren't. And it was just kind of like, I was telling him, like, man, I think you are more, like, set up to reach people for Jesus in that community than anyone else I know.
Definitely not you.
Definitely not me, because so, like, yeah, a lot of jokes that are being stopped right now in my brain. So I was like, that's a great example of how. The how is, like, I get to hang out with someone who has a reason to exist in somewhere else and just help them see, no, this is actually, like, the things that you already love and you're already doing, like, that's actually deeply a part of your journey and your story as a disciple maker. And just to see, I remember Tristan just kind of looks up like, yeah, you know, like, yeah, kind of like something clicks, right? I think for leaders in a Western context or an urban context, that's a lot of it. We're just casting vision. We're helping people see that the place that God's already called them to is probably something they're already doing. But then there are others, and that's where we have to have this conversation a lot. There are others who God just puts on their heart, a group of people that they naturally don't have a reason to exist. And so then you do have to start thinking a little more strategically as an outsider who needs to raise up insiders. So if that's you, you're in Kansas City or you're in another city, like, you have felt a calling to, you know, like, I got some friends that are older that are joining us in this young adult initiative in Kansas City. Well, they're not young adults. Right. And so, but they have a heart for young adults, and they're not going to have a ton of time in ministry capacity to go do this plus some of these other contexts. They're going all in to help young adults and reach young adults. Right. So they have to think as an outsider. Right. They have to think as a catalyst. They have to think, who are my inside leaders that are going to, like, I get to be a mentor. I get to walk alongside you, but I am not the insider. I'm not the primary worker. And that is good to know, because our natural instinct is to think leader equals the person with the most knowledge. Leader equals the one who will do the teaching. Leader equals the one who will speak the most. And I was saying, if you are in that role and you're an outsider, leading is serving. It's fanning the flame. It's raising up the insiders. It's speaking less. It's grabbing coffee with the leader at some other point and having different conversations, not in the moment. It's embracing the mess. That doesn't have to look perfect. You can be sit there thinking, oh, no, this is how you do it. And you want to just grip, you take control of the meeting or the situation because you could do it better. Yeah, you probably could if you've done this a ton of times and this person's new. But no, if you're an outside leader.
But that's the point. You can't.
Yeah, you think you can.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You think you can, but you ultimately can't because you're not the inside leader.
Exactly. So even if you have better things to say, quote unquote, the right things to say, you can do the DBS the best because you've done it the most, it'll actually be less effective than if the insider's doing it who's doing it, quote unquote, worse. That's what's crazy, and that's the role of an outside leader.
And that's the third piece is when we prioritize the indigenous leader, it helps foster a sense of ownership and investment in the movement, which leads to a greater participation and engagement from the wider community. I just think we really could have gone further. Let me throw the questions for discussion and team reflection, because you were beginning to hit on something that was really profound as well, of what does leadership mean? And how do you think about that? So these questions of reflection are: reflect on your own primary culture and how it might have affected your expression of faith, understanding of leadership, and church preferences. Like you're saying, we want the person that looks, has the most charisma, the greatest gifts in teaching or sharing. Like, that's your primary culture, probably going, I thought I was supposed to be that person leading. The second question is practically, what does it look like in your context to prioritize insider leaders? And are there statements, suggestions, or conclusions here that should influence what we do? So I just think, linger on the leadership question more. Like, what does it mean to lead? Does it mean to be out front? Does it mean to have the voice all the time, the most power? And how do you... when you think about these older leaders that are a part of your young adults and how they're investing, it's like you move to that coaching season. Or like, you're not holding power. You're not holding sway or voice, but you do hold influence over giving them principles and frameworks and going like, hey, here's what I've learned. How do you contextualize this for your 20-somethings? Because you're going to have to figure this out anyway. I already figured it out for my people, but I want to give you this. So that's good.
Yeah, I feel like we maybe talked around for 30 minutes and finally found some meat that's really good to chew on.
Thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah, so if you tell your friends about this episode, just tell them to go to the 30-minute marker, and should be good. No, I do think that's probably the crux of it all, right? Is like, what does leadership look like? What does it mean to be an inside leader and outside leader? And I will end with some of those discussion reflection questions you just said. Like, I think it is just a good reminder to us that leadership doesn't equal the most knowledge or the most talking. Like, I think, to me, that's the most practical thing. Leadership is actually, I'm going to come alongside you, I'm going to put my arm around you, and I'm going to help you thrive. Like, if we do that well as outside leaders, we'll raise up inside leaders. If you're an inside leader and you have that leadership, and you probably are talking more, and you probably have those traditional understandings of leadership, that's cool. Now, how can you replicate that, right? How can you bring others to the table and replicate other inside leaders? So, yeah, man, it's good stuff. Man, it's good to see your face on the screen.
Yeah, interviews the next couple of weeks with inside leaders.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya.